a work in progress as well. So we're going to see some preliminary sets of results. It's a joint work with a student of mine, Colleen. She is in Thèse Cifre in EDF and also fellow at the Climate Economic Chair. I think I can start. Yes, I was, so in my previous intervention, I was basically explaining the multiplicity of instruments that we have in the portfolio of European policies in order to reach the transition. And in particular, I was focusing on incentive to integrate renewable into the energy mix. And we were exactly discussing at the end the fact that we shouldn't somehow neglect also that the other side of the question is to penalize fossil fuels. So we had some discussion on how those instruments overlap and which are the incentives that creates for renewables. Here comes another layer of the European policy that is way less studied than the first system, that is the market for quotas in Europe, for I think a couple of reasons. The first one is that the system is not yet operational, but I mean, this was also the case for the CBAM, who has attracted more attention in the literature, to somehow try to foresee the likely effect of this idea of border adjustment tax. And the second one is that it doesn't exist yet. And the second idea is that I think that it has potential that is not so, let's say, pleasant, in the sense that we are at the heart of the problem of acceptability of environmental policies and climate policies, in that this is now something that is going to affect our daily lives. And it is somehow difficult to think that finally CO2 prices will be in our bills as well, or when we go to refill our cars. Nevertheless, it is to me important to open this research question, and we are here. That is why it is also a work in progress. It is an attempt to, in particular, see the interaction between the system of the EU ETS1 and this new one that I'm going to explain. So the first point is that we have a challenge such that in the design of the European Commission, this is the first coordinated tool to take all diffuse emissions. Whereas ETS1 is on point emissions that we can measure and track with a certain degrees of certainty. Here, it's really something that depends on usage, in particular of final usage of consumers, in two important usages, that is heating and transportation. It is part of the EU plan for carbon neutrality. And in the philosophy, if you want, of the European Commission, we really have these building blocks, that is emission of scope 1 and 2 that are covered by the ETS1, the carbon adjustment, the CBAM, that is going to take into account scope 3 emissions that comes from the supply chain, that is from importing some goods. And here, somehow they are upstream, scope 3 emissions. And here what we have is scope 3 emissions, but downstream. So it is going to, so the perimeter of this new regulation is residential and commercial heating. That is, we have a threshold that is defining also what we call small consumers in the terminology of the European Commission. and road transport without any kind of exception, that is cars, buses, and company fleets. The objective is to overall to reduce therefore CO2 emissions by 42% quite rapidly. This new system is start to be operational soon in 2027. We are going to see the timeline, and there are some possibility to shift it that are included in the directive. The directive is quite hard to read, so I'm trying to put some milestones. But it starts this year. Whether it can be delayed, the decision will be taken later, but we have the initial phase that it is not the easiest one because there is the accounting of the emission levels. And based on that accounting, there will be the distribution of allocations. That is the initial phase in which the regulator is going to distribute the initial allocations to retailers. It is important to see how it works in the sense that the regulated entities are all me and you. I mean, we heat and we possibly use cars. However, we will be regulated through our suppliers of both energy, I mean in particular gas, and fuel stations. So based on this initial accounting, there will be a decrease, which is already impressive, 5% every year of the initial allocation basket, knowing that for the EU ETS1 we have arrived at more or less 2%. So the decrease in the cap is even more rapid than in the EU ETS1. And since there was, again, potential flows, or the reason why we have CBAM, one of the reasons why we have CBAM is to avoid distortion between those who buy and those who have grandfathered emissions, that is, I mean, free of charge emissions, the allocation will be 100% auctioned since the beginning. As I was saying, it has a potential to be, I mean, not well, easy to implement for these acceptability reasons. And then in order to ease the process and to take into account the potential high impact on the energy cost at the consumer level, there are some possibilities to protect consumers from that increase, which can be, in fact, to the same extent of what we have experienced during the energy crisis. But in order to avoid then complementary policies that have to compensate for the increase of the energy prices, there are some safety valves such that if there is a sudden disruption in, for instance, gas again, the system will be delayed. And if there are some other questions really linked to acceptability, we're going to say a word later, there will be also some compensating mechanisms. The idea of the European Commission is to have a price that should be around 45 euros per ton, just I mean, we have this number. Of course, it is in our mind because it is more or less the same as the contribution climat in France, as you may know, except that the perimeter, it is not as restricted as it is the case in France. Now there will be no exception, no niche fiscal, so no possibilities of exclusion. So of course, this idea of the 45 tons is something that is obtained by the European Commission through simulations by using the standard impact assessment. Because again, I mean, the Commission only uses the quantities, the allocation as an instrument, and then they let the market play in order to reach, it is still something that, I mean, these certificates can be exchanged, and therefore this price is not something that has to be interpreted again as a tax, but it should emerge from the mechanism of exchanging the allowances through the regulated entities. So we are not sure at all that 45 will be the price, but this is what the European Commission communicates. So the first point in which there will be let's say, the stress test is 2028, and then we have, therefore, this 3 years and a half to prepare. In order also to contain the variability of this EU ETS2 price, there are also some mechanisms copied on the functioning of the EU ETS1, like, for instance, a specific market stability reserve that is going to be operational even before the point that will be made in 2028, so we start in 2027. And it has specific rules of adjusting the overall cap. And the idea is to have a mechanism like the stability reserve that is applied, that started to be operational in the EU ETS1 as from 2019. But I mean, for the EU ETS1, it was something that has started like 15 years after the start of the system, whereas from the EU ETS2, it is operational as from the beginning. Again, this reserve is going to fine-tune the allocation in order, from the point of view of the European Commission, to stabilize the price around 45. So if the price increased, there would be a release of allowances and vice versa. There are some limitations that, well, for the moment, we are not going to take into account, I mean, this kind of adjustment, but it may have something that is interesting. We don't have yet this question, but this idea of dynamics is also something that can be taken into account. Now, yes, also something that should be clear, and it is important for the follow-up and the assumption that we take in our model. The caps, as those who are more familiar with the EU ETS1, are completely separate. So the caps of the two systems, EU ETS1 and 2, are separate, and the two systems are not interconnected. The permit that is bought upstream by a gas producer, importer in our case, is not going to compensate in any way the needs he has to cover the emissions downstream. So it is foreseen, but not yet in the directive, that maybe one day the cap will converge to have a unique, very broad regulation, but this will require also a reform of the EU ETS1, knowing that, I mean, the EU ETS1 or the rules governing the EU ETS1 are not conceived in the idea of carbon neutrality. We're not conceived in the idea of carbon neutrality, which is actually our constraint. This convergence requires also a thorough reform of the carbon markets in Europe that may come. The fact that there is a barrier between the two is important. Now, what we have in the literature. So in the literature, we have a few models. So as I was saying, it's not a topic that in which we have seen a lot of papers, but still we are at the beginning of this, I think, important question. I mean, what we have is like, I do remember how it was also for the UETS-1 simulations, or for the CBAM simulations. So there is a bunch of models that have been applied, I mean, integrated assessment models, or DESG, or partial equilibrium models, depending on the tools that are used, that have simulated which is the likely price that we can experience in a set of countries in particular. So we see that we have a couple of works on France, Germany, and Poland, and France, Spain, and Poland. So the idea is that it will be also something different at the national level, which prices that skyrocket much higher than what the European Commission foresees. A couple of models that have been including the overall EU that look at something that is even higher, approaching 300 euros per ton. Just a reference, actually the EU ETS-1 price is around, I think, between 60 and 70, right? There are also some papers that, so the first bunch of papers doesn't consider this issue of complementary policies that is possible also into the foreseen by the directive. If we take them into account, like for instance the functioning of the reserve, it may mitigate the prices, but not that much. So the range remains quite impressive, between 200 and 300. The only model that seems to be more optimistic is a very recent, it's a working paper that using primes reduces with complementary policies the impact, calculating a price that is around 70 euros. So we have a bunch of prices, but it does, well, our interest starts from saying which are the factors behind those prices, because I mean, given that this intervention is simulated, the main question is to understand the drivers of these prices, because this is the, for us as economists, the interesting part, right? To understand which are the fundamentals, in order to also, instead of giving numbers, and this is what we are going to do, we don't give numbers, maybe we're going to make simulations, but we try to understand the theoretical factors behind the establishment of those prices, so the functioning of the cap, and in particular also whether there is an indirect link with the EU ETS-1. There are also some other interactions that may be taken into account that have in the literature review of the EU ETS-2 that may be useful to have in mind. Those sectors, building and transportation, are also targeted by other policies. This is what it is called the effort sharing regulation. Just to name one that we all know, energy efficiency in the building. This is not going to, the EU ETS-2 is not going to be a substitute for those measures. It is more the idea of increasing the pressure and being complementary with effort sharing regulation that is decided at the national level. What it is interesting for the literature that has been looking again with most of the time simulations is the idea that some distributional effects seems to appear here. And in particular, the divide in Europe between countries that are, I mean, poorer and richer countries that will be affected in different ways. From that, I mean, the idea is also to give importance to the complementary policies. The most interesting one is the Social Climate Fund, which again is a novel feature of the way in which CO2 will be regulated. So ex ante, it is foreseen by the European Commission that due to these distributional issues, I was talking about richer and poorer countries, but of course there is a potential of regressive impact between richer and poorer citizens. There is ex ante a social funds that takes part of the revenue from the auctions and then it goes to redistribute it to the countries. The amount of this social fund is not that, I mean, big. It's 150 million allowances, but it would be insufficient, and the idea is just to signal member states that they have to put forward some national complementary policies in order to absorb the inequality effect, sector-specific effect, or revenue-specific effect. So I was introducing, spend a little bit of time because, I mean, it is not something that is very popular. And therefore, yeah.
I have a question. So how do you think countries will adapt their energy tax? Will they allow them, for instance? Or?
You mean whether it is going to be for countries that have already their own carbon tax, how it is going to overlap?
No, just a fuel tax, a regular fuel tax. Will they allow them? Or?
This is, I mean, this is open to the local decision of member states. They can decide to adjust the energy taxation or not. So this is not something that is foreseen by the directive because it comes within the idea of the sovereignty in energy policy. And also, as you know, in the philosophy of the DG Environment, the idea is that they do the carbon pricing and member states, or maybe also the DG Energy is going to say something about taxation. But I don't think so. I mean, I think that it will be a decision of the member states whether there can be some substitution effect with energy taxation that we were also discussing last time. There's no provision in the directive that says something that has to be adjusted in energy taxation. Since as I was saying, we have a few studies, identifying the gap is easy in the sense that there are a lot of things that have not been studied. So what it is of interest to us in particular is this interaction between the ETS 1 and 2. We may address perhaps later on this idea of regressivity because we do have something that may allow potentially to do it because we take into account really the consumer demand. And also this idea of understanding how potentially, as not yet done in our model, how the complementary policy, which may include, by the way, also taxation, further taxation, are going to impact the equilibrium on the EU ETS 2. So the research question that we would like to address in a first bunch of analysis is to understand which is the behavior of consumers faced to the imperative of decarbonization. So how the choices of consumers are impacted by having out of the blue this new CO2 price. And another issue that has to do with the idea of having two parallel markets, that is the upstream market and the downstream market, which is the interaction between ITS 1 and 2. The model that we use is, by the way, it takes into account, we have started with a model of energy demand. That is a model in which the focus was to understand the transition. So he was focusing on modeling the fossil fuel sector and the incentive to shift to clean technologies with what we were discussing at the beginning of the week, that is subsidies or taxes. What we do by taking, at least for some of the part of the model of Eichner-Petig, we add fossil fuel sector that whose incentive will be modeled by a specific sectorial, constraint also, because they will be subject to the EU ETS 1. We take into account this idea of European versus national policies, and in particular, as I was anticipating, we take into account the final energy demand. So we are at the preliminary steps, and we are looking for the initial, let's say, benchmark. If we set it, then we can also extend the model by integrating strategic behavior. For the moment, we have the benchmark in perfect competition, adding also the idea that it is a European market, right? So the exchange may be also of allowances may include 2 countries, which is the interest, by the way, of the system, because again, like the ETS 1, we have that the different abatement costs from different content of the our final demand has to be taken into account, and this will be the motive for the trading. And also something that I think will be easier to put, because we already have the setting to do so, is the point that consumers may also decide to make some abatement directly, that is by switching, for instance, from gas to electricity in heating, but this is going to come with some cost, some investment cost. The interaction are quite a lot here, so I'm going to split them in the upstream and in the downstream part of the market. So we have the electricity market that electricity can be produced by green or brown electricity. So the difference comes in the in some parameters that are going to be, in particular, the productivity of the different sources of electricity, and the emissions that are the EB and ED. So in the electricity markets, both technologies are a perfect substitute. The only thing that distinguishes the green electricity is that we go backward to which are the sources of brown electricity, that is electricity that is obtained by, for instance, using gas in the fuel market. This is going to therefore be an input for brown electricity through this function F, which is going therefore to give in a with a one-to-one input technology the input for the brown electricity. Therefore, at the end of the day, the production of the final good will depend on the input of electricity that is taken by the green and the brown one, with an imperfect substitution between EX, so the electricity that comes out from the market, and the fuel market, so they are imperfectly substituted with the parameter rho, that enters a specific production function that is a Cobb-Douglas, in which we also take into account the final input R. So X is the final good, the electricity is E, and the fuel market is F. But it is not the end, because with the electricity market, the fuel market, and the final goods, we are going, therefore, to build the final demand for consumers, which is the point that we add also into the initial model. The previous model, the previous slide is inspired by Rudinger and Pettig. This is something that we add into the model, that is understanding at the utility level of the consumer, that is the demand of final goods, electricity supply, and fuel supply. The fuel that are there, just to bridge with my previous introduction, because we have simultaneously also the choice of transport, right? So the fuel is there to represent also the utility that a consumer takes from using fuel to move. And the third pillar of the model is the climate regulation. That is going to hinge on two parts now, the ETS1, gas producer, oil producer, they are regulated in the EU ETS1, where there is a cap that is therefore the sum of what it is given to these two sectors, whereas consumers will be, or the downstream, will be regulated in the fuel market, what we call fuel market in the EU ETS2, that is going to take all these sources of emissions at the downstream level. Here you see that we have also taken the caps as separate. So F1 is the cap of the EU ETS1, F2 will be the cap of the EU ETS2. And this will be, of course, very important for us in the price formation step, in the carbon price, I mean. So some specifications that I've already shown, just to point out the fact that we do have two technologies for electricity production, and therefore we handle this good that is composite. The fossil fuel production is just the general one, coal, gas, or it doesn't depend from final usage, but it is specific with this productivity fee. Was already mentioning the caps, and let's also take a question on the utility function. So we assume that it is a standard utility function increasing with consumption of final goods and then energy services that are substitute. And we add the possibility of making an investment in the revenue constraint, which is this cost K, that for the moment we don't use, but it is important to put it there because it may have this additional decision by the consumer whether they invest in switching towards greener fuel and electricity. So what we assume that from, again, that will be the case, by the way, from out of the blue, we are in our homes with the cars, and we have this constraint such that we have the boiler, I mean the original equipment, and therefore this is going to also limit the purchase of electricity that we make at the price PE. If we want to shift the gas boiler to something that is electrical, we have to somehow remanage our electricity consumption. And therefore, there will be the equipment cost that allows us to do so. That is capital K. To get the first results, we oversimplify the model. That is, we don't take into account any productivity effect specific to the brown or the green electricity. We normalize the composite goods to have a price of 1, and therefore this is going to simplify the profit functions. So we can get the expression for the optimal price of electricity in terms of production, and this is under perfect competition. So notice here that this is the profit function of the retailer, because he has to pay the fuel cost and also the emission cost A1, which is going to give us, therefore, the electricity price that depends on A1 and the fuel cost and the parameters of substitution in terms of the final good, the demand. As for the fossil fuel production profit, that has to do also with both markets, we can derive the prices which are the fuel price and the price, the final price that is added in his production function. They again depend on A2, that is the emission price in the UETS2. And then finally the other good that is supplied. We can again, so the composite good X is the one in which we have the possible substitution between for the consumers, from the part of the consumers, and the relative prices of all the inputs, including A1, that is the price of the UETS1, I mean, no matter of the how it works. So it is important to see that again we have the explicit expression for PF plus A1. And then with all these prices, the methodology is simple. That is, we inject all the prices in the utility function of consumers, and we maximize that utility by taking into account for the moment this K as fixed, and we derive the demand of the composite goods and the electricity and the fuel, that is transportation and electricity at the home level. So with taking that in the budget constraints, we have the overall final demand into the system. That basically depends on the possibility of substitution between brown and clean inputs. So the results that we have so far is that we wanted to get to, because this is our initial point, is the energy prices and EU ETS 1 and 2 prices. So it must be at the equilibrium that the fuel prices equalize. This depends on the fact that we have now a parameter phi that is unique. If we allow for different productivity, this won't be true, but I mean, again, it is done for to have a benchmark. And since we have this barrier between the cap on the UETS 1 and 2, as we were expecting, we have different prices at these different regulation levels. And what it is interesting is that, and what I mean, it was also the objective that we have in mind, that instead of having these bunch of numbers and we don't know exactly how do they come out, having an approach by black boxes, the idea is to track the fundamentals, to understand which are the layers and which are also the way in which we can see the impact of this EU ETS2 and whether we can consider that, perhaps by simulation, this 45 watt going backwards, if we impose that, for instance, A2 is 45, what does it imply in terms of substitution at the energy level for the consumers or for the retailers? So what we see is that the price of EU ETS1 depends on the productivity and the share of the fossil fuel in the economy. Whereas the price in EU ETS2 depends on the energy price, the substitutability between the different inputs, and of course the overall quota, which is not the case for the EU ETS1, because it goes through somehow the way in which the EU ETS1 hinges on the final market. I'm done, so I'm just presenting the flavor of some of the initial results, and much of what we see from there is an avenue for getting different aspects of this model. Starting from the point that we think interesting on endogenizing the fossil fuel prices, the clean energy prices, the EU ETS1 and 2 prices, we can now look at more complex questions, that is imperfect competition and complementary policies. And that's it.
We can take